I've been following creepypastas for a long, long while now, and I've seen them take many, many different forms and undergo countless, dare I say, evolutions. Of course, we all know them as the campfire stories of the internet, typically showcased in online literature, but even at its humble beginnings, it was the little things that made these online stories memorable to so many people. Need I remind you that a lot of the true classic creepypastas came from posts on Reddit that sometimes had a creepy image attached to it. And a lot of the times, the image itself was much more scary than the actual story that was written. Like, I remember that. I was there. But even though a lot of these stories, scared the bejesus out of me, there was still a morbid curiosity that was eating away at me. There were some times where I would turn to channels like Mr. Creepypasta and where I would turn to channels like Mr. Creepypasta and Creeps McPasta, and even some ordinary gamers back when he was a creepypasta channel. Or heck, even if I wasn't in the mood to listen to a full story, I would turn to channels like Tat's Top Videos to look at lists on different creepypastas that would scare the socks off you. And as time went on, it's actually pretty amazing how creepypastas have evolved over time and how they've adjusted to the internet as time went on. I particularly find it interesting when creepypastas are translated in a visual medium. And I feel like even if some of the outcomes can be rough, and they can be real rough sometimes, I could still appreciate it in an artistic sense. The feeling is kind of similar to, let's say, stumbling upon an old drawing you made as a kid, and you're left thinking, dang, this looks terrible, yet oddly charming. And with the technology we have nowadays and the talent we have behind making these new stories and stuff, it's really cool to see new works and also reinterpretations of the old works thrive and be showcased in a way that I frankly admire. However, I cannot say the same thing when it comes to major studios trying to replicate certain aspects of creepypastas or internet horror, or try to make an adaptation out of something, because more often than not, they miss the mark entirely. For example, Slender, to put it mildly, is probably the worst horror movie of all time, and that's saying something. It's basically a hodgepodge of every terrible horror cliche in the book, and it doesn't even display it in any even remotely interesting way. And when they're not butchering a beloved icon like Slender, not a sentence that I thought would come out of my mouth, there's shit like the Unfriended series, where it's nonsensical at best, and it feels like the people behind it have no clue how the internet and those who inhabit it work. However, I do have a bit of hope for potential projects down the road, specifically with productions that are much smaller. We're all going to the World's Fair, despite all its flaws and its rough presentation. There was just something about the mood of that felt kind of relatable. And the fact that the director, Jane Schwashburn, made a movie recently with A24, I really appreciate how much they're getting a lot of attention. Another film I can think of that feels like a total creepypasta film is Skinamarink. And even though you can argue that that film is even more polarizing than the ones mentioned prior, I still absolutely love the atmosphere. And I feel like it replicates to a T this childlike fear of darkness and the unknown, which was something I kind of felt when I would stay up a little late and read some scary stories on the internet and then peer into the darkness please don't let there be glowing red eyes. But anyways, something like Skinamarink being played in theaters, I thought was really great and a good sign in my eyes, and I feel like there should be more movies like that being shown in theaters. And the fact that recently I've been seeing online that a lot of creators' works are now looking very professional grade. I mean, heck, Alex Kister of the Mandela Catalog is writing on a screenplay as of me recording this. And so, yeah, with that in mind, I thought it would be fun to mention some creepypasta works that I think would be interesting to see developed as a feature-length film or something, as well as giving like some explanations and stuff on how that could be achieved and work out effectively. I'm going to start out with some rather obvious choices and then get a little more obscure as I go along. I'm probably going to mention a bunch of other movies as like visual examples of what I'm thinking of. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Like I said before, a good backbone that helped support a lot of old creepypastas back in the day was the image that was attached to it. Like, there were stories like Jeff the Killer, Squidward's Suicide, Sonic EXE, which, even though the stories have not aged well, I remember the images themselves were spooky and memorable enough that it would live rent-free in my head. But out of all of those images, Smile Dog was something that truly shook me to the bone when I first saw it. Like, it was so bad to the point where I couldn't even look at the image without being all scared. Like, I would see it out of the corner of my eye and I would immediately avert eye contact with it. But also another thing that I feel like separates Smile Dog from those stories is that I would argue that the story itself has aged remarkably well. It's a very simple story at the end of the day, but it at least has some aspects in it that I kind of appreciate. I like the journalistic aspect that this takes, where we basically follow this guy who interviewing a woman about having nightmares about the image. And there's this like whole section where it breaks down how the image can't be found on online forums and how they're like fakes, even though like at some points it was like spreading like wildfire. Also, without spoiling anything, there is one moment in the end that felt like a gotcha moment that I thought was pretty cool. And I feel like even though the story is simple, there's like a lot you can get out of it, and kind of in a way speaks to like the core foundation of creepypastas, where it focuses primarily on the internet and like evil on the internet. And while I feel like there have been like a lot of videos online that do their own iterations of Smile Dog, mainly through the lens of a cursed video, I feel like it would be interesting to take the story of Smile Dog and put it in like a more narrative sense. Because with something like this, one thing I was kind of reminded of were some films by Kiyoshi Kurosawa with his films Pulse and Cure. Specifically with the former, because Pulse was a film that was made in 2001 or something, and it just sets up such a thick and dense atmosphere that you can cut through it with a knife. And the fact that it uses technology in such a subtle yet terrifying lens feels very ahead of its time. What I'm basically getting at is that I think it would be interesting if there was a crime narrative revolving around Smile Dog. Imagine some type of crime thriller, something similar to a David Fincher film, kind of very unassuming, but then it slowly takes on a more supernatural tone, making things very macabre and disturbing as it goes along. Maybe find a way to fit the journalistic angle of the original story. Freaking car. So yeah, I feel like exploring the story in a more crime lens would, in my opinion, have some interesting results to it, and I feel like would be more harmonious with the story than one would think. That freaking car. Borrasca, I find to be a very important work in the history of creepypastas, because I feel like that's one of the few early examples that I can think of that like took like some of the fundamentals of creepypastas as basically like, again, like a way to tell spooky stories on the internet and elevated it to a level that is unmatched. And it's just something that I would call like professional grade. It first starts off as a family moving into a new town, and we follow a bunch of kids that are trying to uncover this like weird supernatural conspiracy that's going on in the town. And like things first start off in very unassuming ways where things don't seem like too out of place for like a spooky story or whatever. But then the final third is so utterly devastating and hard to read in a really good way. And I feel like the first Borrasca as a whole is damn near perfect in and of itself, while like Borrasca V is like a bit of a continuation of it, which is something that I have a bit of mixed feelings on. Because while I do feel like it has a lot of great highlights, and at its best, it perfectly portrays like this sense of hopelessness and being put at like a huge disadvantage to like a much bigger power. But it also like has a lot of weak points with it, especially with the final few moments, which just get downright comical and kind of kills the whole vibe of the story in its entirety, which is a shame because I felt like if it was consistent with how it started in the first half, I felt like it would have been a very interesting follow-up to it, which now I'm going to segue into how I believe that both Borrasca and Borrasca V can make effective movies. And before you say anything, yes, I know there's a bit of a radio play thing with like Cole Sprouse or whoever, but I'm talking about visual media. I feel like the first Borrasca, in terms of writing, needs to have like the least amount of changes to it. And I feel like a lot of people would be upset if that was tinkered with in a lot of ways. And I feel like one way it could effectively translate its sense of progression visually is like maybe having things start off looking almost like a Goosebumps episode or something out of Fear Street, where it's like very bright colors, almost like cartoony and campy in a way, maybe even something like a little bit out of like a Stephen King miniseries from back in the day. And by the time we get to those moments where things start getting real, maybe like the style shifts into something a lot colder, like something out of a Hanukkah film, like Funny Games or something. And I feel like the combination of the two would certainly sound interesting on paper and would be interesting to see someone like try to replicate that. And as for Borrasca V, I feel like it should be renamed to like Return to Borrasca or something like that. And I feel like that's something that could have some changes in like the original writing, specifically in the back half. And I feel like they could like continue like the coldness of a Hanukkah, but then at key moments of like nostalgia or whatever, they change the style of the filmmaking a little bit. I'm basically saying that there's something there in Borrasca V that could be worked with and expanded upon, which is why I might as well include Borrasca V with the original Borrasca itself. This is probably going to sound a little basic of me, but if I had to choose like my number one favorite creepypasta, I would have to give it to Penpal. Mainly because it's something that like holds a special place in my heart, because it was like a first wake-up call to where this genre of internet horror could be taken to. Like, this story, I think, is perfect, and I find the style of writing to be very accessible to people. And also, I think it's really cool that it managed to be released as like a full novel, which I own, by the way, and it actually does have some changes from the original story, which I don't think take away from it at all. In fact, if anything, I find the writing in the book to be more complete and focused, and I feel like it did enough to expand on some of the little things in the story, but without having the choices feel unnecessary. So of course, something that's like literally been adapted to a novel, of course, like no dur, like someone would look at it and be like, huh, we should adapt this into a movie. One comparison that I thought of recently that I feel like is going to rub people the wrong way is that with the amount of flashbacks and time jumping, the structure almost kind of reminds me of like a Park Chan-wook film. Now, before like anything gets ugly in the comment sections or whatever, let me explain. Like, sure, Penpal is nowhere as intricate as like a Park Chan-wook film. And I feel like the way that it presents how certain events and details are revealed over time is like kind of similar to what makes Park Chan-wook films kind of unique. And like, I'm not saying that like, oh, this Korean director should do an adaptation of this book, but I'm more using it as like a bit of a reference point as to like how they could like stylistically show it. Like one film that he made that I feel like it could be reworked into it in some way is Lady Vengeance, where the plot is like very detailed and like has a lot of moving parts to it, but it's very concise. But another aspect of it that I find very interesting is how over time with the film, the color is quite literally sucked out of it. And I feel like that aspect, I feel like could maybe be similarly replicated in like a Penpal adaptation. I mean, without being like too derivative or anything. Because think about it, it would be interesting because literally throughout Penpal is almost like seeing this character slowly lose his innocence over time, all the while revisiting these childhood memories. And it would be interesting if like a visual aspect was like tinkered with as like a character in and of itself, like playing with the saturation or something. Like another film I can think of that does this similarly is A Single Man, which uses the saturation as a reflection of the main character's mood, and it does so in a very effective manner. Something like that I feel like could potentially be used in something like this. But of course, that's like what I think because I love the hell out of this story. And I really don't want people to mess this up. Please. 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 Ted the Caver. I mean, legendary work. Classic. I mean, who doesn't love Ted the Caver? Still holds up after all this time. The pacing is great. The fact that it was originally shown as like a separate website in and of itself is very interesting. The images still to this day are very jarring and nail-biting, to put it lightly. I feel like something like this presented in the way that it is like totally fine as is. But God, like the material here, if put under like the right direction and screenwriting, would just be fireworks. Like imagine like a film in a similar way to The Descent or As Above, So Below. But instead of being like a more traditional horror film, it's more of a slow burn with more blatant Lovecraftian energy to it. Or maybe even like taking things in like a more artsy direction, like let's say them using like similar camera angles like in the cave or some locations or whatever in like a similar vein to Jean Dilma. As I feel like that sort of presentation would like make the climax of the story hit so much harder. However, this is like something that I feel like if it was announced that there would be like a movie adaptation of this, I would be nervous because I feel like Ted the Caver, when it comes to like cinema, would be a bit of a risky move in terms of doing a disservice to the story itself and making a movie that's like more generic and doesn't really set itself apart from other films that are like in a very similar vein of, oh, we're spelunking and oh no, something's weird in the cave. Basically, I'm saying that like this could be a chance to do something new and set this apart from others. Ickbarr Bigelsteine is something that I don't see too much conversation about. Maybe I'm not looking hard enough, but as far as I can tell, I haven't seen too much talk about it, and it's something that I think is kind of underrated. I mean, sure, like, it's a simple story about a creepy childhood doll that is used to protect our main character from the nightmares in the world. Even though it eventually comes at a cost, I'll give you a hint, it's something that involves teeth. And while based off the plot description alone, it sounds like something that's not too special, but the magic of Ickbarr Bigelsteine is the execution and like how its intense moments shine through and are being described. And the fact that at a couple points it just goes from 1 to 100 real quick is just... I feel like the main complaint that I have for it is that I wish that the story was expanded upon, especially in the second half when our main character becomes an adult and has to deal with Ickbarr. It's this sense of ambiguity and the setup on a story that you can do so much with that I feel like it would be like a great foundation for a film. Revisiting this story, I feel like one aspect that I feel like would set this apart from all these other weird supernatural doll movies that we see everywhere is that there's like a bit of a surreal, almost quirky aspect to what's being shown here. And I feel like it's that aspect that could be explored more and be like a driving force in the presentation and the plot. Something like a Yorgos Lanthimos film, like Killing of a Sacred Deer or Kinds of Kindness, where it's something that like on the surface is like very stooped in reality, but there's something about it that's simultaneously artificial but also slightly fantastical. And I feel like the story of Ickbarr Bigelsteine could be something in like a sort of similar vein to that. And again, not saying that like people should completely derive something off of another work, but instead, I guess, use it again like a bit of a reference and jumping off point for like inspiration. So yeah, Ickbarr Bigelsteine, you better stop sleeping on him. Trust me. Dogscape is another story that I feel is both underrated and something that needs to be talked about more, and also something that can be expanded upon greatly. Like, the premise of the story itself is just macabre in and of itself, where the whole foundation of the story is that there's some sort of weird dog virus thing that ends up like turning the earth into this fleshy landscape that's just made out of like dog flesh and mouths and bones and stuff. And throughout the original story, we get all these different anecdotes of people and clans and weird creatures that are roaming this weird world. And like the concepts that it delves into and just how disgusting and filthy it can get at times is just something that I really admire for just how out there everything is. And again, the fact that like the original story in and of itself is an anthology and leaves so many unanswered questions in the air, not to mention how it jumps to like different points in time in the world. Again, there are so many possibilities that you can get out of it. Like the description for like the world itself, how the earth is just this huge pile of dog flesh, is something like I would pay money to like see that up on the big screen. And when we're talking about like the storyline, sure, you can have like the whole film be like one big story in and of itself, but one suggestion I would make to make something like this kind of like fit in with the original is almost have the whole thing feel like an anthology. Like maybe something like VHS or Creepshow or the ABCs of Death, where you have multiple directors working on their own little segments, but they like fit in a certain criteria of like the world building or something. Or maybe if you want to like keep like the whole vision more consistent, maybe you can like pull something like a Ballad of Buster Scruggs, where even though it has like multiple standalone stories, it's all under the same director. Again, just so much to get out of it. The possibilities are endless, and this is something that deserves a lot of attention because there is just it's so weird and I love it. I feel like Mother Horse Eyes would be an appropriate finisher to this video because it's something that I just discovered recently, and also like the thing that kind of like jump started this whole video to begin with, because it's just downright criminal that I just discovered this now. Like, this is up there with one of the most detailed and well-written creepypastas ever. Like, this is something that is long, like almost like 9 hours of material long. And it's something that's like very difficult to explain, so I recommend going into it completely blind like I did. But just know that it gets very graphic. There are a lot of story threads that weave in and out of each other, and while at first like it might seem like a tall order for people, I feel like if you like give it the time of day and patience, like you're in for a wild ride. And I feel like something like this, I feel like would work very well more as like a mini-series, because again, there's so much to cover here. But Val, you might ask, this video is about films, what gives? Well, I mean, Letterboxd has entries for miniseries, so why not? And also, this is my video, so shut up. Like, I feel like something like this with like all of its like story threads and B plots and whatnot, I feel like putting this in like a multi-episode series is just too perfect. It's just almost made too easy. Like, there were parts where I was like going through this story and something that popped in my mind was something like Twin Peaks, specifically with the season 3 return thing. Not only because like there are moments where it goes into like very strange territories, but also how it's presented where things like jump around a lot, and like each storyline can like be its own separate thing. And while like on their own, like they may seem odd, it's still memorable in and of itself, and in a way like adds to like the weirder, bigger picture of what Twin Peaks is going for. And that's something that I kind of figured would be similar to something like Mother Horse Eyes. I mean, don't get me wrong. Mother Horse Eyes, I feel like if you pay attention to it, I would say it's easier to like understand what it's going for, while with Twin Peaks, it's like there are points where I don't even know what the hell's happening. But what I'm getting at is that I feel like Mother Horse Eyes has like enough material that I feel like would be interesting to see translated in a narrative visual medium. And I feel like it would be a great way for people to like direct their attention to it if like they play their cards right. But now we got to find out who the hell wrote this, because Who wrote this? Show yourself, you vile fiend. So yeah, those are my picks of creepypastas that I feel like would make great films, movies, miniseries, just presented in like anything visual or something. Thank you for watching this all the way through. It really means a lot. I'm pretty sure this is like very long at this point, but is it worth it? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. My name is Valentino, and I am out of here. Bye.